Of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn. Brothers, sisters, and viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Given the current context that we all know going on in the world, the context of pandemic and disease, one may wonder, if I'm a religious person, then why are there bad things happening to me? If there are good people who follow this religion, then is it expected that they also need to suffer in the same way like everybody else? And if there are things in the world that we consider to be harms and evils that are man-made, something like a disease is supposed to be entirely natural and cannot really be blamed on human beings. That's one. Another type of questioning that we may encounter is, what about this notion that we hear that people refer to as karma? Does karma exist, and what is the Islamic position with regards to it? The notion that basically what goes around comes around, and that whatever we put out in the world is going to come back to us in one shape or form or another. What does Islam say about this type of notion? Very quickly, for the notion of karma, originally this is a notion that comes to us from the Oriental religions, from Taoism and Jainism and Hinduism and Sikhism and Buddhism. You find this notion very present in different variants in all of these Oriental religions or worldviews. And the idea initially, literally, what it means is simply work or your actions. As a spiritual principle, what it means is that your fate or your future is determined by your actions, the actions that you put out. And more recently, this same notion has actually traveled into what we call the New Age movements, where we are told that whatever feelings and whatever thoughts and whatever actions and even intentions that you may have, you're putting out in the world, these are going to come back to you in one way or another. This is the notion of karma. Another question that we may have, and all of these are related, another question is, what is supposed to be the relationship between a human being and nature? So, some of these questions are questions that are usually discussed or studied under the general field or heading of environmental ethics within philosophy. The relationship, for instance, between a human being and the world. When I live in this world, can my actions have an actual impact and effect on this world, or is this world entirely dictated, whatever happens in it, entirely determined by the material causes, the causes that we study in natural sciences, for instance? Can my intentions and my actions also have an effect or not? And is it Islamic to think so or not? In another way, we can ask the question, when I live in this type of world, is it a one-way relationship where I am subjected to the laws that are in place, and those laws are going to dictate and determine what happens to me? But it's not the other way around. my actions and my intentions and I as an entity in this world do not have a direct impact on the world itself. So is it a two-way street? Is it reciprocal? Is there a mutual relationship between myself and the world? Can I actually, with my actions, my will, my intentions, can I actually attract good or attract bad towards me? Or no? Many of us perhaps think that when we look at the type of world that we have and our understanding of this world, what we see from it is that it looks like it's a material world that is governed by material laws, laws that we can discover through the study of natural sciences. And those of us who are believers, who are practicing and religious, according to this worldview, we may also think that there's a parallel world to this one. That one is a more spiritual one. So I live this life and I live this world based on the causal relationships that I find in the laws of natural science. And at the same time, I know that there is a spiritual, religious dimension to my existence here. So, for instance, I'm supposed to behave in a certain way. So if I believe in that type of behavior and worldview, I'm going to think that, let's say if I pray, I fast, I read the Quran, I perform the pilgrimage, I give to charity, I help the others, those are going to translate into rewards. And I will get those rewards in the afterlife, where I'm going to see what I'm referring to as the spiritual or religious aspect to my actions here in this life. And on the other side, I'm supposed to abstain from certain things. So if I decide to do those things, if I decide, let's say, to eat what I'm not supposed to eat, drink what I'm not supposed to drink, look at what I'm not supposed to look at, listen to what I'm not supposed to listen to, touch what I'm not supposed to touch. If I do any of those things, those translate into what we refer to as sins, and the repercussions, the actual effects of those, I get them in the afterlife, after I die. Because this world, according to this view, this world is this material life. So the spiritual component of it, we don't really feel it or see it, unless it's an exceptional situation. Otherwise, this is all left to the afterlife. I think many of us, this is how we view this world. So is it really in this manner? And so when we look at these questions, the question of what we may refer to as, the benefits and harms, especially the ones that are natural. The question of, anything and everything related to the notions of karma. The notion of the relationship with nature and the world in general, and how I'm supposed to be using nature, or am I simply subjected to the natural laws? These are a lot of questions, but I hope in the manner in which I'm presenting them that you can see that they're all interconnected. So the question is, does Islam have anything to say to all of this? And the short answer is yes. There's an entire theory, a very sophisticated, complex, deep theory that explains all of this, that we are trying to provide an overview of today. So hopefully, if we're successful at the end of this, we can make sense of these types of questions. So, to start answering these questions, regarding karma, we need to get something out of the way first. All of these questions actually derive from our understanding of the general theme in Islam of Tawheed. So the better understanding we have of Tawheed, the better we are able to answer those questions. They all derive from that notion. In Islam, we believe that the entire structure, the entire worldview, the entire philosophy of Islam derives from Tawheed. The deeper you go in it, the deeper you see the connections. If you go to a notion like karma, what you notice is that it is supposed to be a blind principle, a blind law. It's not a personal law. So in other words, it's an action-reaction principle. For someone who believes in a personal God, this becomes very problematic. If you believe in a God who actually knows that you exist, a God who hears you, who sees you, with whom you can have a personal relationship, as we believe in our religions, the Abrahamic faiths, for instance, you can pray to this type of God. If you believe in this type of God, then this notion of karma as it comes from these Oriental religions cannot work. Because basically it says that the universe is entirely governed by this blind force, where whatever you put into it, you get back. And it stops there. When we know that the universe needs to be, or whatever realm of existence you put in, needs to be governed by that God that you believe in, which is a personal God. So it cannot just be blind principles. There's a personal dimension to it. So that's the first point regarding karma. Now, let's start looking at these notions of harms and benefits that we may find in nature. Does the Quran actually talk about things that happen in the world, these things that we may refer to as natural phenomena? Does it refer to them as things that can be harmful or beneficial or not? So today we may look at something and we say, you know, this is happening and it's a bad thing. This is a storm or a hurricane, it has bad effects, it's destroying a city, for instance. So we're adding a component to it, a subjective component from ourselves, that this is harmful or that this is good. How does the Holy Quran view these types of phenomena? Are they good or bad, or are they just neutral? The Holy Quran actually refers to some of these natural phenomena, interestingly enough, as being hasanat and sayyi'at. In a verse in the Quran, it says, we disperse them, it's talking about, you know, Bani Israel, we disperse them into communities around the earth. Some of them were righteous, and some of them otherwise. And we tested them with hasanat and sayyi'at. We tested them with good times and bad times, so that they may come back, so that they may return, so that they may remember. But the key here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He tested them with hasanat and sayyi'at, referring to things that we encounter in nature. We would see these things are a part of the natural world. But He refers to those phenomena as hasanat and sayyi'at, which is a little bit strange coming from our point of view, because usually we think of a hasana or a sayyi'ah as something that a human being has done. And this is going to be the key to enter into the topic. Perhaps there is an insight here. Perhaps the Quran, when it refers to something good happening to you from nature as a hasana, perhaps it is because you have yourself performed the hasana. You have yourself performed the righteous action, which in turn provides the righteous action back to you. And the same thing applies to the sayyi'ah, the harm, where the Holy Quran is referring to this natural phenomena as a sayyi'ah, when in fact it shouldn't be. It should be just a neutral, natural phenomenon. Before we enter into the topic more deeply, the Holy Quran also warns us about certain categories of people who, because of their misunderstanding, because of their distorted view about how harms and benefits work, in other words, how Tawheed works, because of this distorted view, they fall into categories of people that the Quran warns us from and basically tells us don't fall into those categories. The first category are those who, when they see harm reaching others, they actually become happy. In those verses it says, for instance, among you is indeed he who drags his feet. So this is in the time of the Holy Prophet, when people are wanting to go into battle. It's difficult, so they procrastinate. The Quran says they drag their feet. And should an affliction visit you, something bad happens to you, he says it was certainly Allah's blessing that I did not accompany them. There is one category of people who are like that. And if you remember in the past nights when we talked about someone like Umar al-Atraf, this is exactly what we see. There are people who say, the bad thing happened, I'm lucky, it's a good thing, and I escaped. They're happy when the bad happens to others, so long as they were not included. A second category of people are the ones who, when they see any good reaching others, they openly, they can't even hide their jealousy. And here a very quick note, because I used that term when I talked about the rank of Al-Abbas alayhi salam in this narration from Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, where I said that when he is going to be brought back in the afterlife, he will be of such a rank that he will make all the shuhada, in both the senses of a martyr or a witness, he will make them all jealous. That's how he translated it. In Islam, there's two different notions of jealousy, envy or jealousy. One of them is actually a positive form of jealousy, and the other one is a negative one. The positive one, there is nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's desirable. If you see someone with something that you want, neutrally, without having any ill feelings towards the person who has it, without, for instance, hoping that they no longer have that type of benefit, without hoping that that grace disappears from them, then that's a positive form of jealousy. In the sense that you wish you also had what they have, but you don't wish for that thing to disappear. You don't want them to be harmed in any way. In fact, you may pray, if you want to take it to another level, you may pray for them that Allah bestows upon them even more of that. It could be knowledge, it could be children, it could be wealth, it could be anything that you desire. You're not trying to remove that because, for instance, you feel that you're more entitled to it than they are. This, in Islam, is referred to as ghibta. And in the narration of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, this is what he says. He says that those who are going to be the shuhada are going to be having this ghibta, يَغْبُطُهُ عَلَيْهِ. This is going to be the type of jealousy that is not the negative, the haram one, the illicit one, where you wish that that grace disappears from the person. You have ill feelings towards them. For instance, you think that they don't deserve it, or you're more entitled to it than they are. So in this category of people, there are people who, when they see any good reaching others, in their minds, it's as though they're in competition. They don't understand why the others got anything good, and they wish that they were the ones who would have gotten it. In the very negative sense of the jealousy that we just described. So the Quran says about those people, but should a grace from Allah come to you, He will surely say, as if there was no affection between you and Him. When you're both Muslims and you're supposed to be in it for the same thing, the Quran says, and He says, as though there is no affection between you and Him, I wish I were with them so that I had achieved a great success. But in the negative sense. The third category of people that the Quran warns us against, again because of their distorted view of harms and benefits, is that if they see any good reaching them, they talk as though, or they feel as though they were entitled to it all along. Anything good that happens to them, well, of course it should have happened to them, because they deserve it. And inshallah, we're going to come back to this notion of thinking that you deserve and feeling entitled. Inshallah, we're going to come back to that in a couple of nights. So those the Quran says about them, and if any good befalls them, they say, this is from Allah. It's as though it's natural that it befalls me, this good befalls me. This is from Allah. And when an ill befalls them, they say this is from you, turning to the Holy Prophet. So this is when they start blaming others. Because in their mind, they're always entitled to receive the good. So as soon as it's not coming, it's someone else's fault. Say, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Holy Prophet to tell them, all is from Allah. What is the matter with these people that they do not understand anything? The next verse talks about this group as well, but it also talks about the fourth group. So allow me to mention the fourth group and then we recite the verse. It says, the fourth category are those people that if there's any harm that reaches them, then they are quick to attribute it to others, as we just saw in this verse. It's never them. They are not responsible. They're not accountable. It's always someone else's fault. And sometimes this takes a sophisticated form of argument, and sometimes this takes a very simplistic or even superstitious argument. So the Holy Quran tells us about, for instance, the people who were with Musa alayhi salam. It says, whenever any good came to them, they would say, this is our due. And if any ill visited them, they took it for ill omens. So it was basically a superstitious attitude. It's as though Prophet Musa alayhi salam attracted the bad. And so because he is with them, he attracts these harms. So they say, these harms are because of you. You're with us, it's your fault. So they say they took it for ill omens, attending Moses and those who were with him. These are four categories of people that the Quran is warning us to make sure not to fall into. Keeping that in mind, let's now try to look at what the Quran actually says and present the actual theory. So we're going to build it, we're going to try to build it very quickly. Otherwise, this would require a very, very lengthy discussion. So if we want to understand how the benefits and the harms work in the world, and then link it to our place in the world and our relationship with nature, that's what we're going to try to do. We begin with the main notion, as we said, we're always beginning with Tawheed. The first thing that the Quran tells us about this is that whatever exists, it exists because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created it. That's principle one. Allah is the creator of all things. The second argument that the Quran builds on this is that if Allah creates something, it is good. And there's a corollary to it. We're going to read the verses. The corollary is that if you see something good, it comes from Allah. So if God has created it, then it is good. Multiple verses in the Quran presented in different ways. For instance, when it says, He has created everything and determined it in a precise order. In another verse, the one who perfected everything He created. In another verse, He said, when Musa a.s. talking to Fir'aun, He said, our Lord is He who gave everything its creation, then guided it. Okay, so if it's created by God, and it is good. Okay. On the other side, if you see anything good, it's also coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever blessing you have is from Allah. So keeping this in mind, we ask the question, so what about the harms? And what about the evils? And what about the difficulties? What do we do with those? Are they also from Allah or not? And how do they fit into this theory that we just presented, which is it's all from Allah and it's all good? And very quickly, without going into too much detail, this is a topic that we've discussed at length before. The notion of harms does not exist in itself. A harm, there are no pure evils that exist. The most that we could say is that there are things that seem to have a detrimental or a harmful effect on other things. So this is not a blanket statement that there is something that is just evil. That doesn't exist. There are things that have evil in the sense that they have a detrimental or harmful effect from one point of view. from one angle, if you look at that from that perspective, you see that it has a harm. If you look from another one, you'll see that it actually produces good. And the key is, at the end, does it produce more good or more evil? That's the ultimate question. That's the classic argument. We put it aside. We've explained that one in the past enough, and that's the classic argument. What we can add here is that when we look at harms, we can put them in two categories. One of them is that the harms are actually lacks. It's something that's missing. It's not something that exists. It's something that does not exist, that was not created as is. The harm could be a lack of money. The harm could be a lack of knowledge. The harm could be a lack of power, and so on and so forth. So it's not that something was created, it's that there's something that's missing. So that creates a difficulty, it creates a harm. It becomes a detrimental effect to someone or something. So why is it that way? Why is the world created with these types of gaps? The main answer for us, I think, and the more practical one for our purposes, is to say that this is the key to human evolution. This is what makes you a better human being. If your status never changes, if you're never confronted with anything for which you need to work, that would force you to improve, that would force you to move in a direction to avoid a pain, to avoid a lack, to avoid a difficult situation, then you never improve as a human being. And the point of your existence here is to improve, to reach the maximum improvement that you can. And that improvement, because of our nature as human beings, is only possible when we're confronted with difficulties. And this works at the level of a person, you as a person, as a human being, and it works at the level of human societies and human civilizations. This is basically what dictates the history of humankind. The reason why there is something like that medicine that evolves, and there are people who work relentlessly, is because you're confronted with a situation in nature. And so you work hard to try to overcome it. Your act of overcoming it is an act of perfecting yourself, of improving yourself, of growth. You as a person doing this, and humankind in general. So it would be very short-sighted to consider those detrimental, difficult situations as being, all of them, harms or being evil in themselves. This is relative. It's not an absolute. Okay? And we can add a lot of more examples to this, but I think this point is clear. The next point that we want to add is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a distinction in a couple of verses in Surah An-Nisa. He makes a distinction between two types of causes. The first one, there's a verse, let me read the verses of the Quran and then comment on them. The first one says, and if any good befalls them, as we recited, they say this is from min indillah, this is from Allah. This is the good. And if any ill befalls them, something bad happens to them, they say min indik. قُلْ كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. Say it is all from Allah. Okay. In the next verse, the Quran says, مَا أَصَابَكَ مِنْ حَسَنَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Whatever good happens is from Allah. Okay. The second part is the problematic part. It says, وَمَا أَصَابَكَ مِنْ سَيِّئَةٍ فَمِنْ نَفْسِكَ. Whatever ill happens to you is from yourself. Okay, the verse before it just said, it's from Allah. They say it's from you, say no, it's all from Allah. This verse is saying it's from you. How do we explain this? The nuance is very difficult to explain when you read the translation, and that's the issue. If you pay very close attention to the Arabic, you find a key in the verse. The key is the word min ind in the first one, and in the second one, there is no ind. So min. One is min indillah, and the other one is min Allah. And in the first verse, min indik, and in the other one, min nafsik. Okay, so what's the difference? There's a layer. If we are talking about the system of the laws of the universe, this is a system of causality, then everything is from Allah. And this is what the first verse is saying. When it says, min indillah, everything is from Allah. Everything works within the general order that Allah has put in place for everything to work. Within that world, there are laws in place, including laws that if you do a certain thing, a certain act, you are going to get a certain effect. If you do a certain good, you are going to get good. And if you do a certain bad, you're going to get bad. This is the difference between these two verses. So now that we have reached this, let us start looking at this specific point. Are we truly saying, because these verses are talking about the harms and the benefits that people encounter and experience, is this verse actually saying that human beings, because of their actions in this world, they may get benefits in this world, and because of their actions, bad actions in this world, they're going to get bad, harmful effects in this world? Is the verse actually saying this? Because this is going to be very different from the worldview that we presented, where we said there is a spiritual world, and the effects of that spiritual world are only in the hereafter, only in the afterlife, not in this world. You may do all the good or all the bad, religious good or religious bad in this world, nothing will change, because this world is dictated by the laws of natural science. That's the worldview that we're examining. Is this correct? Or do you actually see the impacts and the effects of your actions in this world before the next? This verse seems to say that if there is anything good that is happening to you, it is from Allah, and if there's anything harmful happening to you, it is from yourself. So let's explore this component. Does the Quran actually say that if someone does anything, behave in a certain way that seems to be, we'll see what that way is, that seems to cause certain effects, it's going to be harmful to them in this life? And does it actually say that if you do certain other things, it's going to be beneficial to you in this life? The Quran says in certain verses, whatever affliction that may visit you is because of what your hands have earned. And He excuses, and Allah excuses many an offense. That's the first verse. When you listen to this verse, do you not feel very clearly that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is establishing a principle for you? He's telling you whatever difficulty, harm, problem you encounter in your life, it's not giving you even any exceptions. It says whatever affliction visits you is because of what your hands have earned. In other words, because of what you have done. And He excuses many an offense. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I'm not even giving you everything that you have done. The majority of it, I'm excusing it. I'm forgiving you for it. But here and there, I'm sending you reminders. If this happened, if that happened, if this happened, it's because of something that you did or something that you didn't do. Another verse of the Quran says, when an affliction visits you while you have inflicted twice as much, do you say, how is this? Say, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Holy Prophet to tell them back, this is from your own selves. So they're unhappy. They say, how could this happen to us? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Holy Prophet to tell them, this is from your own selves. You are the one who caused this yourself. In another verse, the Quran says, so the evils of what they had earned visited them, and they were besieged, they were fenced in by what they used to mock. So they used to do certain things, and the Quran says, those things are the ones that visited them. the evils of what they earned visited them. This is in this life. We're not talking about the afterlife. The next verse says, and when we desire to destroy a town, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if I wanted to destroy a town, what do I need to do? Do I need to destroy it myself? No. If we desire to destroy a town, we command its affluent ones, the ones who have money, who have power, who are the elites, who can really do something and influence. We command its affluent ones to obey Allah, but they commit transgression in it. And so the word becomes due against them. There's a law, there's a principle. We give them power, we give them wealth, we give them money, we give them health, and then we command them to obey God, to be grateful, but they transgress. That's a law. And we're going to understand in more detail how that law works in a second. And then there's a famous verse in the Quran that I hope that the majority of you know very well. It says that corruption, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر, corruption has appeared in land and in the sea. So basically, corruption is everywhere. Why? Where is it coming from? Is it because Allah is imposing, Allah is adding, Allah is putting this corruption in place? No. Corruption has appeared in land and sea because of the doings of people's hands, because of your actions, that He may make them taste some of what they have done. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I'm not giving you back everything you're doing. I'm excusing most of it. I'm forgiving most of it. But this should serve as a reminder. The state that you're in should serve as a reminder. And here there's a very important point to mention for these, before we jump into the more positive way. We've looked at the more negative, the harmful effects. The more positive, or before we jump into this one, is that we need to keep in mind that all of these laws that we're describing, they work at the individual level and they also work at the collective level. They may work at your level as a person, as one person, you and your life, and you're responsible for yourself, but they also work at the social level, at the level of humanity, or at the level of your community, or at the level of your society. So if you live in a world where the majority of people are acting in a certain way, whether you are doing this or not, you're going to be included in the harmful effect of their actions. Because these laws don't only work at the level of the one person and the individual. They work at both the collective level, which means that you have a responsibility, you have a social responsibility. This is the entire notion of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. The enjoining good and forbidding evil is directly connected to this. You're not only responsible for yourself, but you need to equip yourself and prepare yourself so that you can actually not only help yourself, but help others too. So if we continue with the verses of the Quran that talk about the beneficial effects of our actions. We've now established that we can do things the Quran says that directly lead to harmful effects. What about the beneficial ones? The Quran says, if they were steadfast on the path of Allah, we shall provide them with abundant water, which was something very significant for people living in the desert. The Quran is saying, if you want the blessings of God, there's a law. You need to be steadfast on the path. You need to be strong on the way of Allah. Another verse says, and this is talking about the people of the book, Ahl al-Kitab. So this tells us this is not only something that applies to, let's say, Muslims. This is a law that applies to humanity. These are the principles that dictate how human beings are being managed in this world. Had they observed the Torah and the Evangel and what was sent down to them from their Lord, they would have surely have drawn nourishment from above them and from beneath their feet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have basically given them the graces and bounties they want from the heavens and from the earth. There is an upright group among them, but evil is what many of them do. And this is the key. This is where we said, some of them are good, but it's not enough because they're part of a corrupt society. So they're now suffering like everybody else. Another verse of the Quran says, if the people of the towns had been faithful and God-fearing, we would have opened to them the blessings from the heavens and the earth. But they denied, so we seized them. Okay, so this is going to very clearly establish that on both sides, if you do bad, you're going to get bad in this world. If you do good, you're going to get good in this world. Okay, so this is to start to answer that question that we began with this discussion. All of this, as we said, is related to the notion of Tawheed. Keeping all of this in mind, and if we want to now link all of this with our relationship with nature. How are we to use nature? There is a rudimentary or a very simplistic thinking that basically says, and unfortunately a lot of the people who believe in a God and who believe in a world where there is a God who has created human beings they believe in a very hierarchical structure to existence. They think that human beings are at the top, God has created everything for the human being, therefore they can do as they please with anything in nature. It's not as simple as that, and this would actually be the wrong conception if it's presented in this way. So how does it work? The key notion that allows us to understand this is the notion of taskhir, that the Quran refers to a lot. Taskhir basically means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala predisposes what He creates for you to use. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it subjected or submitted to you to use. This is different from saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that you can own that thing and do with it as you please. Not at all, completely different. And the verses of the Quran are very clear that the ownership remains with Allah. And I'm not going to go over all the verses of the Quran that talk about this. We're establishing the points. I think they're clear enough. But if the ownership remains with Allah, and you're only allowed to use them because Allah has predisposed those things for you to use, then this can only mean that for you to use them, you need a permission. If the permission is given, you can use it. What happens if you are not given that permission? So if you are going to use those things, the Quran adds one more layer here. It says that everything that Allah has created has its own awareness, has its own consciousness. And if it is the way it is, including the fact that it's predisposed for you to use, that's because it's consciously created that way and it's doing what it's supposed to do. The problem happens when you want to start using nature and interacting with this world in the wrong way. This is where the problem starts happening. You are starting to go against the divine order of things. Remembering the principles that we established. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying, I've given you permission to use all of those things, so long as you continue to use them as I intended. If you start using them and coming to them with the wrong intention and with the wrong actions, then the repercussion of that is going to be not that you can use them as you wish and please. It's going to be that these natural things that are in place for you are actually going to be rebelling against you. And this is going to be the key to understand our relationship with nature. To understand our relationship with how can we use the resources of the world. The more you want to be able to have use of the natural world, the more you have to fold yourself and be in line with what God wants. We think that the only way to use the things of the world, to benefit from the resources of the world, is to go through it through the natural laws. No, there is more. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us of many instances where the use of the world is not determined only by the natural laws. We have people in the Quran mentioned, people like Dhul Qarnayn. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that he had magnificent powers, amazing powers. And the more Allah gave him powers, the more he used those powers for good, which meant that Allah gave him even more. We have people in the Quran mentioned, such as Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, you are truly my representative. The Quran calls him a Khalifa. In the real sense, in the divine Quranic sense, not in the sense that we've encountered the past few nights. The Khilafah as in political rule. You are truly my Khalifa. So what does that mean? If I truly become the Khalifa, the representative of God on earth, I am fully submitted to God and what He wants. What happens? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says when He would pray, the mountains and the birds would pray with Him. And then when He would, if He wanted to manipulate iron and to manipulate metals, they would melt in His hand like wax melts in your hand. Where does this power come from? It comes from the taskhir. God is saying, the more you obey me, the more I make everything musakhar, predisposed for your use. It is all created for you, but you need to use it as I intended. If you go to Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the same thing He says about Prophet Dawood. And in addition to that, He says, and we made musakhar to him, predisposed to him, the use of the wind, the use of the clouds, the use of the rain, the use of the jinn. Why? This basically means that to the extent that you want to be able to make use of the resources of the world, you have to be in fold and in line with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted from you. The more you do that, this is a natural order of things that we don't see. We need someone to show this to us, and this is what the Quran is doing. It's telling you that you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you more power, and we're not specifically talking about these. We're talking about the ease in your life, the blessing in your life, the way knowledge comes to you, or money comes to you, or having a family, or having children, or the ease in general in your life, whatever you intend to do. You want this world to work the way you want it to work, to be musakhar to you, then you need to work with it as God intended. And the benefits of that, you don't only get them in the afterlife. You get them in this world. But it's more complicated than just you and your work here. Because you're also part of a community, and you're also part of a society. And so you're responsible for all of this as well. And on the opposite side, if you don't do this, this is when nature rebels against you, as we said. And this is where you see, for instance, one way we understand the manner in which the previous peoples, the ancient peoples, were destroyed. One way for us is to say they were destroyed by Allah's punishment. Okay, that's one version, one interpretation. If you look at the manner in which they were destroyed, the people of Nuh, the people of Thamud, the people of Ad, they were all destroyed by nature. The people of Nuh, it's as though water rebelled against them and they had a flood. The people of Ad were destroyed by a wind. It's as though you reach such a point of oppression against the natural order that Allah has put in place that the world rebels against you. And perhaps this gives us insight into the manner in which this world works when we talk about things like plagues and disease and mass death and things of that sort. This is one way to understand what is happening. There are laws that have been explained to us, if we wish to see them, that are right there in front of us. But we need to look at them and accept that perhaps the spiritual world and the material world are not actually two separate worlds. They're one and the same. We're just concentrating on one and forgetting the other. So it's not only that, if you want to have a good afterlife, then do good. It's if you want to have a good life in this world, do good. And the world will start folding to your desire. And we're not saying that it's easy. There is still work involved. The verses of the Quran repeat this again and again. But at least your work is going towards a direction and you will reap those benefits. You will get them. Very quickly, the Quran also tells us that the relationship that we have with those actions is a binding one. It never goes away. Whatever you're putting in the world is everlasting. So if you do good, that good remains out there. And if it influences others, then you are going to be rewarded for all the influence that others are going to get. If it's a good influence. And if it's a bad influence, they're going to be punished for whatever you put in, you're responsible for it. I'm going to skip over the narrations that have to do with all of this and go directly to, if we turn to the tragedy of Karbala. If we look at the tragedy of Karbala, we see everywhere we look, we see all of the themes that we just mentioned, everywhere. The relationship between a human being and the world. The relationship between your actions and the way nature reacts to them. The use of the natural resources of the world as Allah intended or did not intend. Everywhere you look, you will find, if you look properly, you will see that there's a reference to something related to this in the events and the tragedy of Karbala. Starting with the clearest and most obvious one, water. The Quran tells us that everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created is sacred. It's sacred because it's a sign, because it points to God. It points to the power of God, to the knowledge of God, to the existence of God. But some things are more of a sign than others, and therefore they are more sacred than others. There are things that show you the power of God more than others. The wisdom of God more than others. The mercy of God, the knowledge of God more than others. The more something shows you those attributes of Allah, the greater it is and the more sacred it is. And the Quran talks about water again and again. It says, we have made everything come to life with water. It holds a very special place. It talks, oftentimes the Quran mentions how encouraged it is to find people who are thirsty and give them water. That in itself has a great reward. The Quran tells us, or the Islam, the etiquette of our religion tell us that if you are all alone, let's say in the desert, and you're with a horse or a camel, and you have a little bit of water, and you want to perform your prayer and you want to perform your wudu, and you know that the animal is thirsty, you give the water to the animal and you perform tayammum. You use sand, you do not use water for this. This is the importance of using the water as it's intended to be used. And if you go in the life of the Holy Prophet, the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, how water was used. In the Battle of Siffin, we're told that the army of Muawiyah, they had control over the water. And so they refused to allow the people, the army of Imam Ali alayhi salam, to drink. And when finally the army of Imam Ali were able to fight them off of the water, and they were the ones controlling the water, they wanted to do the same thing. And Imam Ali alayhi salam told them, no, do not use water as a weapon. It's forbidden. Water is for everyone. It's a divine resource. In the way to Karbala, Imam Hussein alayhi salam encountered the army under Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. There was a back and forth between them, and so they kept going in parallel. The caravan of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the army, the 4,000 soldiers with Al-Hurr, who was between the caravan of the Imam and the water, preventing them. At one point, the caravan of the Imam and the men with him, they attacked them and they took control over the water. And when they saw after a while that Al-Hurr and his men got thirsty, Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his men went and gave them water. They even gave water to their horses. And the Imam did it himself. He didn't just let his men do it. He would go and he would give them the water himself. Now if you turn the equation to the events that happened in Karbala, as we said, the army of Bani Umayyah, through any means necessary, they wanted to prevent the army of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam from getting a drop of water. We're told that yesterday we mentioned that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when his brother al-Abbas wanted to ask permission to start fighting and he came to the Imam told him, if you must, then go ask for some water for these children. We didn't finish it. And so their answer to him when he asked for water for the children, they told him, if this earth, the face of the earth was covered only with water, we would not give you a single drop. This is how the household of Imam Hussein alayhi salam treated their enemy, and this is how their enemy treats them. And we're told that, and another means to prevent them from water, we're told that after everybody had been killed at the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, all of his companions, all of his Ahl al-Bayt had been killed, the Imam was left all alone, and he did the same thing that al-Abbas did. He attacked and he went on the side of where their 4,000 soldiers were positioned to prevent them from getting to the water. And the Imam fought them off and removed them from the water. And he entered with his horse into the water. And there was a back and forth with the horse, between the Imam and the horse. He tells the horse, you are thirsty and I am thirsty. So go ahead and drink. And in the maqtal, the narrators say the horse lifted its head. It refused to drink. And sometimes some people say this is an exaggeration. If you see some of the horses of nowadays, many YouTube videos and elsewhere, you see how they react. Some of the horses that come and refuse to leave their owner who dies, and so on and so forth. And we're told that the horse of the Imam was one of the best horses, and one of the best horses from the time of the Holy Prophet, bred all the way down to the time of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, who lifted its head. I'm making the link with everything we said about the use of nature. And so we are told that the Imam was about to scoop a handful of water to drink, but then they started crying and yelling to him that, how dare you drink, O Hussein, when your women have been attacked and they are being uncovered. So the Imam rushed back to the camp. This was a lie, so they used lying to prevent the Imam from drinking one drop of water. And this, everything that we said today, is supposed to also help us understand some of the prayers that the Imam said against the army of Bani Umayyah. In one of the ad'iyah that we see from the Imam, when he was asking for water again and again, at some point, one of them told him that we shall never give you a drop of water until you die and enter into hellfire. So the Imam prayed, he said, "Oh Allah, make him die of thirst." And in the maqatil it is mentioned that that man would continue to drink water. And he would drink continuously and the water would end up coming out of his mouth. And he would tell the people around him, he would tell them, "Keep giving me water, I still feel thirsty." And he remained in that state until he died a few days later. Or another one of the prayers of the Imam, which he said on the 10th of Muharram. This one having to do with the time when his son Ali al-Akbar came to ask the Imam to go and fight, asking the permission of the Imam to enter into the battle. When Ali al-Akbar was born, the Imam loved him very much. At the time of the battle of Karbala, he was around 27 years old. From the time of his birth, the Imam knew, and we have narration saying that he knew that he would be killed in the battle of Karbala. When he came to ask permission from the Imam to enter into the battle, we are told that as soon as the woman heard, it created a huge commotion in the tents. They knew that this is one of their main protectors. They were very attached to him. He comes to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. All the companions of the Imam have been killed, and he is the first from the Ahl al-Bayt of the Imam, the household of the Imam, to ask permission, to lead by example. If this is the war of his father, then he is going to be the first to lead by example and enter into the battle. He comes to the Imam, he asks permission. Imam Hussein alayhi salam cries and he embraces Ali al-Akbar. And in some reports, we are told that when he embraces him and he embraces him back, they continue in this embrace until they both lose consciousness and they fall to the ground. Ali al-Akbar ends up entering into the battle. When he enters into the battle, the narrators of the Maqatil tell us that when they saw him fight, to them it was as though they were watching Ali ibn Abi Talib fighting. Imam Hussein alayhi salam stood watching his son Ali al-Akbar fighting, and we are told that his eyes were filled with tears. And the Imam shouted to Umar ibn Sa'd at that point, telling him, "May God cut off your progeny as you have cut off mine and desecrated the family of the messenger of the Holy Prophet. What is the matter with you, Umar ibn Sa'd?" And then we are told that the Imam removed his turban, exposing his hair. And he looked to the heavens and he raised his hands in prayer. So I'm not going to explain the prayer. Inshallah, you will remember everything we said and you make the linkages. The Imam says, "O Allah, bear witness against these folks that a man who is most like your messenger Muhammad in bodily shape, in manners, and in speech has come out to fight them." Maybe a quick word here and I continue. I think for the majority of us, one of our dreams in this world is to see the Holy Prophet in a glimpse, in a dream. There are people who were fighting Imam Hussein alayhi salam who had seen the Holy Prophet in real life. They knew what the Holy Prophet looked like. Imam Hussein alayhi salam is saying, he's asking Allah to bear witness that there is no one who looks more like the Holy Prophet than his son Ali al-Akbar. So it's basically as though you are looking at the Holy Prophet coming. What kind of Muslim can actually attack someone who looks exactly like the Holy Prophet in that manner? And then he says, most like him in body and in manners. The manners of the Holy Prophet, al-khuluq, that the Quran refers to saying, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. One of the greatest praises that Allah gives to His Holy Prophet, He tells him, you are of a sublime character. You have sublime morals. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam says, no one had the morals of the Holy Prophet as much as Ali al-Akbar. And no one was as similar to him in the way he spoke and the way he thought as Ali al-Akbar. So the Imam continues and he says, whenever we miss seeing your Holy Prophet, it is to him that we would look. And then he says, "O Allah," and this is the prayer that I'm not going to comment on, but remember everything we said. The Imam said, "O Allah, deprive them of the blessings of the earth and create dissension among them and make them into many parties, and do not let the rulers ever be pleased with them. For they invited us to support us, and then they transgressed on us and fought us." And this is an answer to those who say it is the Shia who killed the Imam. The Imam is saying that those who invited him are in the army that he is fighting. Those were not the Shia. Those were from Bani Umayyah and the traitors of Kufa and Sham. That the Imam is saying they are the ones who called us, but then they betrayed us, and now they are fighting us. Then the Imam recited the verse, Allah has surely chosen Adam and the family of Nuh and the family of Ibrahim and the family of Imran over the people, offspring one from another, and Allah is all hearing, all knowing. At that point, Ali al-Akbar is in the battle. Finally, someone hits him on the head from behind. He falls on his horse. The blood from his head falls on the face of the horse and it covers its eyes. So the horse no longer knows which direction to run, so it ran in the direction of the enemy camp. where they surrounded Ali al-Akbar from all sides and they started cutting him to pieces with their swords. So he cried out to his father, "O father Aba Abdullah, may God's peace be upon you. I am now seeing my grandfather, the Holy Prophet, and he is feeding me, or he's giving me a drink from his cup, one from which I will never go thirsty again. And he is telling me that he has reserved one like it for you." When Ali al-Akbar finally fell and the dust settled, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam came to his son and he saw Ali al-Akbar in the state that he was. We are told that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam picked up a scoop, a handful of blood from the blood of his body, and he threw it to the heavens. And not a drop of it fell back. And then the Imam lied down over the body of Ali al-Akbar. He put his cheek on his cheek and he said, "There is no good in this life after you. May God curse those who desecrated the messenger of Allah, and how dare they have defied the one who is merciful." Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin